Hello, NBA fans. My name is Mackenzie Salmon. We are a week into the playoffs. My head is already spinning with how many storylines there are to break down, so I'm calling in reinforcements because I can't do it myself. Joining me live are two of USA Today Sports' very best, NBA reporter Jeff Zillgitt and national columnist Dan Wolken. Guys, I am really happy to have you here for this chat. And for anyone that is watching along right now, please head to the comment section, drop any questions you might have for Jeff and Dan, and we'll try and get those answered for you. All right, guys, let's dive right into this. So let's start off week one, general thoughts here. So like I said before, the NBA postseason is off to a blazing start. Plenty of storylines to dig into, but I want to start on the positive side of things and see who you've been most impressed with at this point in time. So Jeff, we'll start off with you. Which team has looked the best to you straight out of the gate?
To me, it's the Denver Nuggets. All season long, I've argued that Boston has the best starting five, but I'm not sure that there's a better starting five in the NBA when it comes to executing with the game on the line than the Denver Nuggets. When you have Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray handling the basketball, not committing a lot of turnovers, scoring for themselves, creating for their teammates, you just see how they're dismantling teams. They did it all last playoffs, won a championship. They did it for a majority of the regular season, and now they're doing it in the playoffs against the Lakers. And you see what a wide gap there is between the two teams when you see how Denver performs down the stretch. And I mentioned Nikola Jokic. I mean, by all accounts, it looks like he's going to win his third MVP in 4 seasons. Jamal Murray plays at a high level. You throw in Michael Porter Jr., Contavious Caldwell-Pope, and then you have Aaron Gordon. It's just a solid two-way team. They don't need to go deep. They proved that last year, and that's what I really like about this Nuggets team right now.
Dan, are you on the Nuggets wave as well?
Yeah, I think they've done a great job. Obviously, you're up 3-0 in the series. You're almost driving the stake into the heart of LeBron James yet again. But I also think that the Timberwolves have been really impressive just handling their business at home against the Suns. I mean, the Suns, the team that was supposed to be built for the playoffs. Obviously, Minnesota had a better season and got the home court advantage. But, I just think that the way they've played in the first 2 games, they've really stamped themselves as the better team. Now, maybe it flips as the series goes to the West Coast, but I just think given the playoff experience differential between these two teams, you go in thinking maybe Phoenix has a chance to jump on them early, but I just think it's been a very impressive start for the Timberwolves to go up 2-0 and to do so, I think, in relatively commanding fashion.
Yeah. Let's flip things around here. Talk about some teams who've really struggled in the first handful of games. So, Dan, I'll start with you on this one. Who's been the most uninspiring team in the postseason up to this point?
Well, look, I think the easy answer is the Lakers, but they're not supposed to beat Denver, so I don't think I'll criticize them too much here. I would look at the Bucks. Obviously they don't have Giannis, and it's a little bit questionable whether he's going to be able to come back in this series. But I thought in game 2, they really kind of looked slow against that Pacers team that basically just likes to push the ball as fast as they can, off misses, off makes. They're going to get down the court quickly and test your transition defense. And I didn't think the Bucks did a very good job in game 2. Now it goes back to Indy, and I think they're in real trouble.
Yeah. Jeff, what about you?
If you look at the top 3 teams in the West, and that's Oklahoma City, Denver, and Minnesota, they've all taken care of business the way they've needed to. If you look at the top seed in the East, I thought it was a really bad loss that the Celtics lost game 2 to the Miami Heat without Jimmy Butler. This is a Celtics team, best record in the league. I talk about their starting 5 being the best in the league, and they lose game 2 at home. And it just gives enough doubt or enough confidence to Miami if they can get game 3 and really start to put pressure on this Boston team. I'm not saying that Boston's going to win every game they play, but I just thought setting a tone right off the bat with a 2-0 series lead is where this team needed to go. Dan made this point the other day. The Heat made 23 three-pointers. That was a playoff franchise record. They are not going to sustain that, throughout an entire series. But if you look at the success the Heat have had against Boston, another win for Miami in this series to either tie it at 2 or take a 2-1 lead would really start to tighten the bolts on this Celtics team.
Right. I want to talk about officiating here for a second. It's funny to me because we all know it's the losing teams who search for excuses when the going gets tough. And those excuses usually come in the form of blaming the officiating. And that is exactly what's happening here early in the playoffs. We saw LeBron James, Nick Nurse openly call out officials after their Game 2 loss. LeBron specifically calling out the replay center for not doing their job. It was very funny. But Jeff, USA Today Sports actually conducted a poll where we asked fans if LeBron had a legitimate something to gripe about when it comes to the NBA officiating in the postseason. 53% of voters on Threads said no. 59% on Twitter said no. So do you agree with the voters?
LeBron has a complaint there because D'Angelo Russell got hit in the face, and so a foul should have been called. But I also look at time and circumstance of the game. I'm not one who likes to blame the officials for wins and losses. There are, each team has approximately 100 possessions. There's tons of plays that could go either way. And this happened at the end of the third quarter. The Lakers still had a 11-point lead early in the fourth. There were plenty of opportunities to give themselves a chance to win. Nick Nurse probably has a bigger complaint at the end of that game, too, between the Sixers and the Knicks. His player, Tyrese Maxey, was fouled twice. They didn't call it. The last 2-minute report indicates the referees made incorrect no calls. At that time of the game, it likely would have made a difference in the outcome. So I understand Philadelphia's angst, but they got Game 3. They have a chance to tie it, and let's move on and play.
Yeah. Dan, talking specifically to LeBron's knock on the replay center, we've seen these sort of technologies implemented all over sports. International soccer has VAR. The NFL has fully integrated it into their league, but there's still a traditional group of fans who don't like its impact on the games. In your opinion, do you think that the NBA has done a good job utilizing it?
There's never going to be a perfect system. And what you don't want is what happens often in college basketball, which is that in the last 2 minutes of a game, it's referees just running to the monitor on every close play. I don't think that's good for the flow of the game. I don't think it's good for fans. Human error in officiating is something that is just part of sports, whether you like it or not, and you have to be able to learn to live with it. Having said that, I do think Philadelphia has a legitimate gripe here. I just thought that was poor officiating. I thought they didn't do what they're trained to do in that situation. LeBron's complaint, I mean, that was not at the end of the game. That was way before. I don't really think that situation had any real bearing on the way that everything played out there. But for Philadelphia, I think they could easily be looking at the situation here and saying, we should be up 2-1 right now in the series, because yes, they would have won that game if Tyrese Maxey gets a foul call or if they give Nick Nurse the timeout there. So it's imperfect. The challenge system, by and large, I think works. But I do think if, as a coach, what's got to be frustrating all the time, not just in the playoffs, but in the regular season as well, is sometimes you have to blow your challenge on a just blatantly obvious bad call. And I think that's probably where a lot of coaches get cross with the refs is, why do I have to use my challenge here in the third quarter of this game, when we should be able to save this thing for the end. And I totally get that complaint.
Yeah, totally. Jeff, you have your ear close to everything going on in the league. What's been their response to some of these huge claims about how games are being called?
Look, they have their last 2-minute report, and I know that doesn't include that Lakers call, which was at the end of the third quarter. But they try to do a amount of transparency at the end of these games. What they don't do is that they don't announce fines for referees, which happens from time to time. They don't like this any more than anyone else does. They would prefer that the referees be 100%. That we know that's just not going to happen. I'm with Dan. Philadelphia, they got hosed. The league wants them to call it a certain way. They didn't do it. I know some people like the referees to swallow their whistle in those situations, but that's not what the league wants. If it's a foul, it's a foul. And we know that the number of referees who are refereeing first round games, they were chosen based on their ability throughout the entire season through grades by the officiating staff, grades from coaches, and they're reviewed and they're bringing the 36 best officials to the first round. And that will be narrowed down even further for the second round conference finals, and then a small group of officials for the NBA finals. And again, the league doesn't like this. They would prefer the focus be on games, but I would just also acknowledge that officiating mistakes, complaints about the officials, wrong calls, right calls, it is a playoff tradition just as much as anything else is. And players and coaches are trying to get the upper hand, hoping that maybe the next call goes their way, next possession, next game, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And I know all of you guys out there listening right now, if you have comments or complaints about the officiating, let us know in the comments. We want to hear them. Moving on, of course, we just talked about LeBron when it comes to the officiating, but I want to dive a little deeper into him and the Lakers right now. Jokic and the Nuggets continue to be a thorn in their side, going up 3-0 in that series. And it just begs the question, how much does LeBron have left in the tank? So, Jeff, I know you followed every step of LeBron's career very closely, from Cleveland to Miami, back to Cleveland, now Los Angeles. You've seen it all when it comes to LeBron. I want you to take us inside his mind right now with things not going particularly well. How does he handle this kind of adversity?
LeBron's pretty pragmatic and realistic in these situations. You don't need to ask him to read the writing on the wall. He knows it. He's made comments. He knows this team when he watches and plays, whether this has happened, whether it's a Miami team, whether it's a Cleveland team, he understands he's up against it. He knew that coming into the series. I think after game one, he said their margin for error is really, really small. And so he understands that. I think we all acknowledge that if the Lakers had been up 2-1 or 3-0 or even won a game in this series, giving themselves a chance, it'd be like, all right, not surprised. But I don't think we're also surprised at the way Denver has handled business. I don't think LeBron is either. Ultimately, what we're looking at, knowing that no team has come back from a 3-0 deficit in the NBA final or in the NBA playoffs, let's just take a look at this team moving forward. And LeBron knows that this team needs to be better to be able to compete with the Denver Nuggets, maybe even Oklahoma City and Minnesota, because those three teams, the way they're set up roster-wise, salary-wise, with their contracts, they're not going anywhere for the next couple seasons. And so now if LeBron wants to continue playing with the Lakers, he's going to have to sit down with the front office and they're going to have to talk about what this team needs on the roster to become better. If you look at LeBron's numbers, they're pretty good in this series. And so is Anthony Davis. And you look at the rest of the roster, and we've talked about this the last couple of years, it's just not a team that's built to win a championship right now.
Yeah. Perfect segue, Jeff. We had a comment from Stephanie Forbes on Instagram, and she asked, could the Lakers play a better game without relying so much on LeBron James to pull in points? It appears he may be enabling the players to not play at their highest potential. So what do you say to that, Jeff? Is LeBron holding the rest of the team from contributing?
No. He has 25 points, about 8 assists, 7 rebounds. Those are his career averages. He tries to keep people involved. Look, they haven't made shots. They don't execute the same way that Denver does. And I think it's less what LeBron is doing than it is collectively what the team is doing. And, that's what it comes down to right there. You certainly want LeBron to be aggressive, to get points. But if other players aren't making shots, he had 7 turnovers in game one, so he bears some responsibility for that as well. But I certainly don't think telling an all NBA player to hold back a little bit on his scoring is the direction the Lakers are going to take.
For sure. Dan, we know one of the big factors keeping LeBron on the court is getting the chance to play with or against his son, Bronny. But as someone who follows college sports as much as you do you think Bronny is the kind of player to even make that a reality? Is it ambitious to think he can be in the league next season? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this whole conversation I find very uncomfortable because if it was a prospect who was not named Bronny James, doing the exact same thing that he did in his first year at USC, nobody would ever talk about him playing in the NBA next year. And I don't mean that as a slight on Bronny James, but I just think realistically, the best path for him is his own path. It's going back to college, whether that's USC or somewhere else, establishing himself as a player. He also is coming off a significant medical situation that probably delayed his development somewhat. I don't think there's any reason to force his entry into the NBA if it ever happens at all. And I don't think it's smart to do it, especially in service of somebody who's darn near 40 years old. And I think that's the whole problem with the LeBron conversation up and down the board, whether it's Bronny, whether it's what you do with the Lakers, whether it's his contract. Yeah, LeBron's still an effective player, but he's almost 40 years old. And I just think it's impossible to plan anything out over the next, 2-3 years and project what he's going to be, how fast the physical decline is going to continue to manifest. And yes, he's still good. He is physically declined, no question about that. And I just don't know that there's any real way that the Lakers can reform themselves into a team that is competing with the teams we've already talked about. The OKCs, Minnesota, Denver, Memphis will be back, I would think, in the mix next year. All of these teams who are just better, frankly, and younger than the Lakers. And I just don't think that any calculation of what to do with LeBron James or what he wants to do should include playing with his son, who may not be an NBA player at all. I find the whole conversation very unfair, I think, to a young kid who still has a long way to go in his development.
Absolutely. Moving from the West Coast to the East Coast, the playoffs just feel a little different when the New York Knicks are involved. Obviously, they just dropped huge game 3 to the Sixers in Philly, but to see MSG rocking the way it was for games 1 and 2 has to bring a smile to the face of Adam Silver. We know how passionate Knicks fans are and how big of a market they cover, but Jeff, how important is it for the NBA to have New York in the spotlight?
I think it helps with TV ratings, and Adam Silver and the league office are definitely going to take that. But if you listen to Adam, I don't think there's any preference to who is playing in the playoffs. If you look at the way, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of collective bargaining agreements and restrictions on salary cap, that kind of thing. But what owners have told Adam Silver is they want more teams to be able to have the chance to compete. And if you look, the last 5 seasons, we have not had a repeat winner in the NBA Finals. We're not seeing many rematches of teams. Now, we see the same group of teams in general competing and going deep, that kind of thing. But that's not what Adam Silver wants. It's not the days of David Stern. The old joke when he was commissioner was his favorite series was the Lakers versus the Lakers. That's not the way this league operates. It's not the way, or it operates under Adam Silver. And so, yes, are they happy that the Knicks are doing well, bringing in some TV ratings? Absolutely. But are they adamant somehow that they want the Knicks to be good and do this every year? I don't think they're afraid of dynasties like the Golden State Warriors, but I don't think they want to manufacture anything as well, because it is really good for the league to see Minnesota with Anthony Edwards, Oklahoma City with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Denver with their group of stars. That's also good for the league as well. And that's ultimately what their goal is I don't think they're looking for parity or anything like that, but they do want more competitive balance in the league, no matter where it's coming from.
Yeah. Dan, what was your reaction to game 3? Yes, Jalen Brunson finally showed up with a big performance, but Joel Embiid showed up with an even bigger one, dropped 50 on the Knicks. It's the epitome of a statement game by the Sixers saying, hey, we're still here. We're not going down easy. So what do you make of the series going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Sixers have actually played pretty well. I mean, as we talked about before, they should have won game 2. They did win game 3, and that's a game they're supposed to win at home. And certainly, down 0-2, you don't have a choice if you want to stay in it. So they did their job. I think game 4 will determine probably the course of the series. If the Knicks get out of Philly with a win, I think they're going to probably wrap it up at home. If it's tied 2-2, I think probably the edge swings back a little bit to Philly. But I think going into the playoffs, that was the most competitive series on paper. And I think it's played out pretty much to form because the Sixers are not a typical 7 seed. The Sixers are a team that lost a whole bunch of games when their best player was out, and they had to kind of go through the hard way to get into the playoffs. But they're better than a lot of the teams seated above them, point blank. And so it's a tough matchup, and I think it's probably a long series.
Yeah. Jeff, how important is it for Joel Embiid to salvage this series and try to advance? It's been year after year of disappointing exits from the playoffs for Philly. So what is on the line for the legacy of Joel Embiid right here?
He was getting a little bit of a pass before this series began because he missed basically the final 2 months of the season dealing with a meniscus injury. He had a procedure to repair it. He missed all of February, all of March, returned for a handful of games in April. He's not 100%. We saw that in the play-in game. And then when you throw in the fact that, he is impacted by a case of Bell's palsy, which it can be painful, it can be aggravating, annoying. And so I'm not sure that this series determines his legacy. But if you heard his comments after Game 3, he indicated he probably only has about 8 more years to play. He wants to win. And so at a certain point, he does. It's been a long time since the Philadelphia 76ers made the conference finals. I think we need to go back to Allen Iverson days. They're trying to change that. I don't know if it's going to happen this season, but certainly with Embiid's injury, he's not going to be looked at the same way if they don't go deep into the playoffs this year as maybe previous years. But it certainly puts some pressure on him next year, the season after, to get this Sixers team a little deeper into the playoffs and maybe even the finals.
For sure. I want to look ahead here for a bit. Straightforward question here, Jeff. Who needs to step it up? A Giannis-less Bucks, Zion-less Pelicans? Who's in worse shape going forward, do you think?
Well, I certainly give the Pelicans, just like I did Embiid, more of a pass than I'm going to give the Milwaukee Bucks. This team has had a season of tumult the whole year, starting with trying to figure out the pairing of Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard, getting that on the right page, and then firing their coach, Adrian Griffin, who was, I think 30-13 at the time, replacing him with Doc Rivers, not really having a great final stretch with Doc Rivers as the coach, and then Giannis being hurt. This is a team that's also invested a lot of money into the roster, gave up a lot of assets to acquire players, including Damian Lillard. They have ownership who's willing to spend, but they also don't want to spend on a team that has a first-round exit or even a second-round exit. It's a team that was built for a championship, and it's one of the teams that I think has the most pressure on them to go deep into the playoffs right now. It's good that New Orleans got in. It would be better to see them with Zion Williamson on the court. I think this is good for their development, but this isn't a team that had expectations to compete for the championship this season, the same as it is for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, absolutely. Year-end awards. Guys, I want to end our chat with a quick look at some of the year-end awards, at least the ones that have been revealed already. So I want to talk about the sixth man award that went to Reed from the Timberwolves. Jeff, we know the season the T-Wolves had. Even Dan mentioned them. It's carrying over to the postseason as well. But what does it say about how important a sixth man is to a team's success and how he embodied that in Minnesota?
Well, Naz Reid is an undrafted player. You get him at an exceptional deal. He's on a 3-year, $45 million contract for the Minnesota Timberwolves. He could easily be a starter on another team in the league, and that's what you're looking for in a six-man. But even more so, I think the nature of the award has evolved over the years, where it used to just go to the highest scoring guy who came off the bench. And I think voters are a little bit more discerning these days, looking at what Naz Reid does on both ends of the court: scoring, passing, rebounding, playing defense. If you look at some of the advanced stats for the Timberwolves, whether you're pairing him with Rudy Gobert on the court at the same time or with Karl Anthony Towns, the Timberwolves put up some really good numbers, especially defensively. And he's doing it in about 24 minutes per game as well.
Yeah.
And so that speaks volumes to the impact that he has. But there's certainly quality six men throughout the league. And, Naz Reid just happened to stand out to voters a little more this year.
Yeah. Okay, Dan, I want your thoughts on the Clutch Award. It was just announced going to Steph Curry, but I'm more curious about what you think of the award as a whole. It's only the second year they've given out. Do you think it's an award that can be taken seriously at this point? Because a part of me thinks it probably won't get a big prominent spot on Steph Curry's trophy case, if you know what I mean.
I think it's a little gimmicky, to be honest with you. And, oftentimes, I think this is true of any sport, right? I think this is true of basketball, football, tennis, golf, whatever. Clutch does not necessarily mean the last second or the last shot or the last inning or whatever. Sometimes the games are won and lost on clutch plays that happen in the third quarter, or, a moment where, all right, the game is sort of teetering and it's either going to be really close or a team's going to go on a huge run and create separation. And to me, that's just as clutch as when you do it on the final possession. So I don't really understand the award very much, to be honest with you. I don't think it really says a whole lot about, or I don't think it says what the NCAA or what the NBA wants it to say. Yeah. Obviously, anytime you give Steph Curry an award, that's not a bad decision. But I just don't really think it fits in the spirit of the other awards that the NBA has been giving out for a long time.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I agree 100%. Jeff, let's wrap it up. Talk MVP very quickly. By all measures, it seems like it's going to go to Jokic. Maybe SGA can sneak it away from him. But if it does go to Jokic, how would a third MVP affect his legacy? I mean, it's still a long way from Kareem's six MVPs, but he would join an exclusive club of Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Moses Malone to win 3. So how big of an impact would this actually have on his legacy, you think?
There's only a handful of players who have won 3 or more MVPs. And if he falls into that category, just think a couple years ago when the NBA unveiled its 75 greatest players and Nikola Jokic wasn't on the list yet. And now, whether we want to rank them and get into that whole kind of thing. But now we're talking about a guy who is going to be one of the top 15 players all time, the way he has played, impacted the game. LeBron James has recognized his ability on the court, says there's, only a handful of people who understand the way Jokic plays and what he does on the court. And those are other MVP candidates as well. If we want to drill down a little bit further, though, I think the candidates, the finalists, when you talk about Luka Doncic, you talk about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and then you talk about Jokic, any of those 3 players, they had a great season. And then I don't really have I'm not really upset of which one of those 3 would win because that's how great they were. I like diversity of opinion when it comes to what voters do. And then just lastly, I know we're getting ready for the Summer Olympics later in Paris, but this will be another season starting with Giannis's 2 MVPs, Jokic's 2 MVPs, Joel Embiid's MVP last year, and now whoever wins it this year of the 3 finalists, it's going to be another non-American born player who wins the award.
Yeah, very good point. All right, you two, very quickly, let's end on one more poll we conducted. So we asked fans, are the Denver Nuggets going to be the first repeat NBA champion since the 2017-2018 Golden State Warriors? So 54% of voters on both Threads and Twitter said yes. I want to ask both of you, do you agree? Dan, you go first.
Yeah, I'm not going to pick against the Nuggets. They've got the best player. They've got the experience. They know what to do in all these situations. They're great in close games. They had a couple hiccups in the regular season that was probably disinterest, but I think in playoff mode, they're the best team.
What about you, Jeff?
Ultimately, I agree with everything Dan said, but I did pick the Celtics to win the finals. And so I'm really interested to see how this team plays out. They added Kristaps Porzingis, Drew Holiday. The starting five was great during the regular season. When you throw in Derek White alongside Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, their bench has been a little bit better than I expected it to be. And look, if it's Denver against Boston in the finals, I think there's going to be a lot of satisfied people to see how that series played out. I'll stick with my original pick, but man, it is really hard to go against what Denver is doing and what they've done, the body of work they put together. And Dan's point, we've made it that great fourth quarter execution. I'm wondering if the Celtics are able to match that.
Guys, I cannot thank you enough for joining me today. Everyone out there watching, thank you for joining us with this live chat. There's obviously so much more to play out in these NBA playoffs. I personally can't wait for it. I'm sure I speak for you too as well. I encourage everyone at home to stay locked in with USA Today Sports to get the daily analysis throughout the rest of the postseason. And of course, you can find us across all major social platforms for more unique content. So for Jeff Zillgitt and Dan Wolken, I'm Mackenzie Salmon. Thank you all for joining us.